Hello, I am Dennis Green with Church Development. Welcome to our webinar on how a church capital campaign can pull your congregation together. It is my pleasure to share what I have learned over the past 30 years serving churches in their church capital campaigns. I've made many friends. I met my wife and have three lovely children from that marriage, and I owe so much happiness in my life to this work, serving the church. I met many kindred spirits like you who share this concern. How can we best serve the church? How can we best serve those who are part of our congregations? So I'd like to distill what I've learned and share that with you. In addition, my coworkers and I are a pack of nerds and we read a great deal. And we're members of conferences and associations that serve the church, and we learn as much as we can from other people in our worlds. And we also borrow all the research we can get our hands on from the corporate sector and the nonprofit sector and even the academic world, which I will cover more as we go. You are welcome to share these slides with your colleagues and friends. We give away, pardon me, we give away all that we have learned eagerly. And you can go to our website, church-development.com, and look at our resources page. And we have a ton of free information that you can download and share. If I can help you, if you're thinking about doing a church capital campaign, please give me a call or send me an email. I would happily volunteer my time with you and your committee as you think the decision through. So it would be my pleasure to join you via Zoom, and my calendar is quite flexible. We were founded in 1992. Before that, I worked in the secular world, helping nonprofit organizations through the same process. So I have an additional 8 years experience there. And if you put that together, that's around 40 years of experience. I know you're thinking, oh, that's how old he is. Yes, that is right. We've helped raise hundreds of millions of dollars, and it has been a pleasure. We take a little bit different approach to how to do a church capital campaign. So we think the ask ought to be based in prayerful discernment and not high pressure. The pressure approach works in the secular world, where you talk to your donors and you present and ask, would you please consider giving $10,000 to the museum or to the college or the YMCA? And that's a very different approach than in a church. The ask needs to be based in prayer and discernment. The decision to give is between the individual and God. And I think we need to allow them that space to do that. Then the other big difference is the engagement that we're going to talk about today. A typical secular campaign is just the asking process. It's just donor to donor to donor to donor, starting at the top, largest donor, working our way all the way down. And you need to take a little bit different approach when you do a church capital campaign, because it is a community. It is a small, tight-knit community, and the relationships are and should be like a tapestry woven together. And we need to respect the nature of community, and we need to complement that to improve that. Now, the proof is in the pudding. That third bullet, we stick with the church for 3 years after the capital campaign, and we want to encourage their weekly giving to increase, which it does by 6 or 7% per year, which is counterintuitive. To me, I take that as proof that our engagement and discernment activities were a success. We also institute a planned giving program that begins after the capital campaign is concluded. We learned that from Daniel Kahneman, the researcher who got a Nobel Prize for creating the field of behavioral economics. He gave it a pejorative term, the sunk cost investment. And we like to think of it as ensuring the gift to the capital campaign by making a planned gift. That's how many donors think. I want to make sure the church is a success. I just gave them a big capital campaign pledge. If I include them in my estate plans, that is a guarantee, an insurance that my first gift was a good idea. So we take a very different approach from other capital campaigns. Number one, the ask is based on prayer, not pressure. And then number two, the level of engagement, which the secular world really should steal from us. I'm about to share with you some statistical validation of why engagement produces a wonderful return on investment. Our church capital campaigns are based in 1 Peter 4:10. Like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. I remember when I first taught my son John this concept. He was young. He was maybe 6 years old. I tucked him into bed, and as I left his bedroom, he said, "Oh, Dad, wait a minute." And I thought he would ask for a glass of water or something like that. I said, "Yes, John, what is it?" He said, "Oh, tell me about yourself. What do you do for a living?" It was obvious he had heard me or his mother say that as we made a new friend, and it's his way of stalling. So I said, "Well, John, in your illustrated Bible, do you remember that place where Jesus was baptized?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, he was dunked in the water." Yeah, so well, that's the Jordan River. "Now, do you remember that place where he walked on the water?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I remember him. I remember that walking on water." I said, "Well, that's the Sea of Galilee. The Jordan River flows into the Sea of Galilee." Now, what they don't tell you as part of that story is it flows back out of the Sea of Galilee and it goes into the Dead Sea. Now, guess what lives in the Dead Sea? I have no idea. So, well, nothing. That's why they call it the Dead Sea. It's a very interesting difference between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. It's basically the same water, but the Dead Sea has no outlet. It takes in and it keeps, and it becomes stagnant and brackish and lifeless. And so my job, as I see myself, is to facilitate the understanding that the water is supposed to flow through the Sea of Galilee, just like God's blessings are supposed to flow through us. And I really enjoy that. That's how your mom and I think of our lives. We're blessed, and it's up to us to joyfully share those blessings. Well, you know what? The story totally worked. He was asleep at that point in time. And my wife tells me, she reminds me, "Dennis, you can go 0 to boring in 2.7 seconds. So forgive me in advance." So here's our agenda. I'm going to put it in context by sharing some theory and some proof. And I will borrow heavily from authors and researchers that I very much appreciate. And then we'll talk about methods that you can employ today, whether or not you do a church capital campaign. You can begin doing these things, and largely they cost nothing and they take very little time, and they produce measurable results. Under 4D, statistically, we have an average increase in weekly giving of 7% during a capital campaign. Now, that's counterintuitive. You think if a person just made a significant capital campaign gift, they would give less weekly. We've found that is not the case. And the rationale is because we implement number two, A, B, C, and D thoroughly during a capital campaign. That results, typically a church capital campaign raises 250% of annual giving in 3-year pledges. So you can do the math. What is 250% of your annual giving? I'm just going to pull an average church, Catholic church capital campaign. The average Catholic church has a budget of about $1 million. The average church capital campaign for Catholics would then be about $2.5 million. The historical average for church capital campaigns across all nonprofits, including churches, it usually costs $1 to raise 10. So a 1,000% return on investment. Now, we don't charge a percent, we charge a set fee. And our average is not 10 to 1. Our average is 25 to 1. That's our historical average over the last 32 years. For every dollar that we are paid, we usually raise 25 in a church capital campaign. So regardless, whatever the size of your budget is, just imagine 2.5 times that in a fund for your capital needs. The trend, as it turns out, is churches now are getting close to imitating universities, where they conduct a church capital campaign every 5 years. Universities now seem to be in a constant capital campaign mode, so they seem to never exit that. So the day one campaign ends, the next one begins in the university world. Now, there's only one reason that they do that, is because it works. Now, for us, proof that it does work in our domain is number 1D. There is an increase in weekly giving during a church capital campaign. So I remember my own church where I go, we did 4 capital campaigns in a row with no rest for the wicked between each one. So it was 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. And yet our giving still went up 7% per year on a weekly basis. So we basically doubled giving for the course of 12 years and experienced a substantial increase in weekly giving as well. Is it a miracle? Well, perhaps, or is perhaps good organizational development science, proved by the things that I'm going to cover just right now. So before we begin, let me just real quickly touch on, this is me, over 30 years of experience, husband, father, cancer survivor. I've written 4 books. I'm writing a 5th book right now, published my research in an academic journal. We keep track. Now, I'll give you this book for free, A Stewardship System, that explains the 7 parts of what increases stewardship, of which we will cover basically 3 today. So I'll give that book to you. You just got to send me an email and ask for it. I do have hardcover copies, but I will send you freely a PDF of that book. We borrow from behavioral economics, which I mentioned earlier, and the many organizations that I am part of and I learn from on a regular basis. Okay, now let's dig into it. The context for engagement. So we want our desired outcome is to pull your congregation together. A church capital campaign can pull your congregation together. Now, we know that this is extremely important. George Barna is a researcher. I welcome you to do your own Google search and purchase his books, as I have. I've learned a great deal of research. He is a constant researcher, and he's a real blessing to the church world. Now, there's another source in here, which I'll mention. I'll show his book a little bit later. But there is another researcher named Zech, Z-E-C-H, and he is kind of the Barna is a Protestant researcher. Zech is a Catholic researcher out of Villanova, and between the two of them, I have learned so much, and I'm so appreciative for each one. And both of them cite how important the social connection is for church memberships. Apparently, there are 4 times we can predict when people go church shopping. Barna is the person that coined that term. We can predict those times in a person's life. And then we can predict they will visit 5 different churches. And furthermore, we can predict the criteria by which they will select a church. This should not be a surprise, but the social connection is the top criteria. It was about 10 years ago that Barna discovered that dogma takes a second place to social connection. I remember working at a church in Liberty, Missouri, and we were doing a church capital campaign, and we had a young woman volunteer to be the leader in our social engagement activities. And she was just so enthusiastic and so full of energy. After a handful of meetings, I had to ask her about her motivation. She said, well, yes, I am highly motivated to make this happen. She said, I went to church here for 1 year before someone greeted me. Oh, I'm so sorry. She says, oh, it's okay. I just want to make sure that that never happens again. I want to use this church capital campaign to connect our members to each other. And I know that's very important. So I thanked her, of course, very much, but that proof is in the pudding that Barna was correct in identifying the social motivation for membership being the top tier for criteria. The other author that I mentioned, Charles Zech, Z-E-C-H, from Villanova, wrote a book titled Why Catholics Don't Give. And statistically, his proof is that Catholics give 1.2% of their income to their church, and the Protestant average is 2.2%. So why is there that significant difference? And in this book about failure analysis, he discovered that we are not very good at connecting socially. And that's something the church needs to work at. Now, item 1B, this should not be a surprise. Maslow and his research has been around for a long time, and we all learned about it in college in our introduction to psychology. It is his premise that we should respect. His premise was unmet needs motivate. And I found that to be true. Barna's research about church shoppers tells us people will go church to church to church to church to church until they have found what they are looking for. And that is something that we need to respect. So you got to ask yourself, do you have a greeter at the front door that connects people? Do you have welcoming events? Do you have coffee and donuts after every single worship? Those are the simple things that just make such a big difference. To cite proof, let me looking number 1C. Fidelity Fund in 2009 underwrote a study to examine the giving habits of high net worth individuals. We extrapolated that forward, and then we did our own research and tracking on our donors. And the phenomenon that they discovered, which in my opinion was just absolutely groundbreaking. Active volunteers give 11 times more than non-volunteers. So what happened there? What is the inspiration? What is the motivation? What's the magical elixir? What is the catalyst that happens when somebody volunteers? Well, they're not volunteering in isolation. Number one, it's a social connection. They're working side by side. And I love the image of the tapestry. So the moment a person decides to participate in the life of their church community, they become more fully woven into the tapestry of that church. It's those social connections become the ties that bind. Now, the number is the mind-boggling thing. 11 times. It's 1,100% more. So if that's all we covered in today's brief webinar, this would tell you what you can do today to pull your congregation more fully together. Now, there is a Gallup polling created a wonderful tool called the ME25, stands for Member Engagement 25. And one of the things they discovered is that only about 15% of your congregation is willing to volunteer to serve on a standing committee. That means 85% are not. In the old days, we used to think it was a third, a third, and a third. And the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. Well, it's even worse than that. It's not a third, it's not 20%, it's 15%. 15%. So if we want to increase volunteering, because we know that it's going to increase their giving over non-volunteers by a factor, a multiple of 11, it does us no good to offer more standing committee volunteer opportunities. What do we need to do? We need to create episodic volunteer opportunities. Episodic volunteer opportunities. That does not mean continuous volunteer opportunities. We want one and done. So you need to offer at least one a month activities where you can show up Saturday morning at 10 a.m. to help rearrange the seating in the social hall, or Tuesday night you can volunteer to count heads at the youth group, or Or Sunday after church, you can volunteer for an hour to help set up and clean up coffee and donuts. The one and done is the key, and they're targeted at your 85%. So the top 15% will respond and they will say, oh, count me in. You got to tell them thank you, but I'm really gunning for the outer 85% people who don't volunteer for anything. Okay. So we want to identify the uninvolved. We want to create episodic volunteer opportunities for them following the guidance from the Fidelity Fund. So volunteering pulls people together. It's doing something meaningful in relationship with other people. Now, item D is this very interesting researcher that one would have not found in a discussion about how a church capital campaign can pull your congregation together. His research is related to influence and persuasion. And what he found six factors that inspire a person to act. Okay. And the action that we want is for them to join, to become more fully engaged with their church. Okay. That is the action that we want. The insight from Cialdini has these 6 factors that follow the acronym RUSLAV. And that stands for reciprocity, urgency, social proof, the likability of the person who is their social connection. A, I can't remember, and V is values. Give me a minute, I'll remember the A. But the social proof is what I want to talk about. For a person to get more fully involved, they have to know people and see human beings have preceded them in their commitment to become more connected. Okay, I remember the A. A is the authority of the statistical proof that something actually does work. So the social proof that we're looking for is that when they join together as a volunteer, they will see other people have preceded them and they can see the field of volunteers. And at some point, they will be recognized and thanked for volunteering, and they can see they are among many others who have been thanked as well. Now, E, we talked about, I talked about how an increase in weekly giving during a capital campaign is a normal thing. And that's what we expect to have happen. And that is proof that it does indeed work. Okay, now let's move from context to action. Okay. And this is going to be, a couple of these will be a little bit repetitive, particularly item C. So the first thing I would recommend that you do is plan deliberately involvement in the decision-making process. Now, you might have a large congregation. That is still okay. One of the greatest blessings of the modern age is SurveyMonkey. And it costs nothing for you to create a SurveyMonkey survey to get input. I recommend that you get input 4 times per year. You find a way to get people to give you input. My personal favorite is to ask them in advance of your annual campaign, your annual stewardship commitment Sunday, perhaps 3 weeks or a month in advance. Ask for their input on setting priorities for the year ahead. Now, you can do that quite easily. You can do it by survey. You can do it by SurveyMonkey survey. You can do it with town hall meetings. These things cost virtually nothing and they take just almost no time. You would gather their input and then present it back in a newsletter, which is very important to prove that you have indeed listened to people. Now, if they participate in this and then they see the newsletter that captures their input and then a later newsletter that says, here's how we used your input in setting the budget and setting objectives for the year ahead, they have a sense of ownership in next year's plans and next year's activities. To learn more about this, I would encourage you to read the work of Carl Rogers and the impact of active listening. It took me 3 days of my life to learn how to be an active listener, but it has been a very good tool that served me my whole life. I had no idea that it could be a tool that is used to engage thousands of people in a church to pull them more together. But that is the key factor. We're going to ask for their input, and then we're going to share it back with them, proving that we heard what they said. Okay, item 2B, connecting people socially. At a minimum, we need to have regular coffee and treats after worship at a minimum once a month. Now, my personal preference is it should be after every single worship, every single Sunday. That is my recommendation. We want to find ways to connect socially, and it can be brief. And I would ask the minister, ask your pastor, please attend these immediately after worship. They might need to step away to change clothes, come back and engage. And of course, the downside is there will be little kids wolfing down a sugar-filled donut and doing sprinting races throughout the social hall. That's okay. We want to connect with any adult possible, and that is the easiest time to do that. And if your minister is willing to do that, I personally feel that ought to be a definition as part of the job, is that you would do that on a regular basis. You will be welcoming and connecting with people because you represent a very important thing in their lives, a very important thing. Item 2C is to engage people as a volunteer. And I want to repeat what I said just a few minutes ago. Please create episodic volunteer opportunities. A more simple way to describe that would be one and done. Please create one and done volunteer opportunities every month. Please advertise them in the bulletin and make announcements so that every Sunday people can hear there's going to be a one and done opportunity coming up. And if you hear it regularly enough, one is inclined to leap into action at some point in time. Now, of course, you want to do reports from standing committees, but what I have discovered over the past 10 years is that episodic volunteer opportunities lead to an openness to serving on a standing committee. And that's the only thing that will grow your inner core, that inner 15%. So we want to cast the net widely. We want to open the door for engagement and have different activities, different time of day, different things, different focus, offer many different opportunities so that people can find a way to get in. Now, what I have experienced is that as a one-way valve. People tend to not go back to being uninvolved. Once they get involved, they make new friendships, they discover this is kind of fun, I can actually have an impact. That is our desired outcome. Now, the last thing that I want to cover is of a spiritual nature. I would recommend collective communal prayer and discernment activities every year. At an Episcopal church in New Jersey, we did one prayer-related activity that caused weekly giving to increase by 16%. So steal this idea. Before your annual stewardship campaign, ask the people on the parish council and the stewardship committee to call everybody in church. Call, and most, you know how it is these days, you're going to leave a lot of messages. Your message will be, hi, this is Dennis Green. I'm on the stewardship committee. I'm just calling to see if there's anything I can pray for on your behalf. You can give me a call, send me a text, send me an email. That's what I'm here for. Thanks, goodbye. leave a lot of those messages. Most people don't call back, but that sense of being in a communal, shared, relational prayer experience has a very important effect. It's as if we have a shared morphic field of the congregation, and it is elevated by prayer and discernment. When we do a church capital campaign, the highlight of the entire campaign is the 2 weeks before Commitment Sunday, in which we have a very deliberate prayer and discernment activity. We have a prayer committee that creates a 14-day guide, and each page has 3 paragraphs and some scripture and a prayer written by a volunteer. So it's a reflection. Each one of those is unique and different. Each day is different for 14 days. And that draws a community together because everybody knows we're working through this particular reflection and scripture and prayer today. We are all doing this together, and it is led by the pastor. So they set the tone and they talk about it on Sunday and they write about it in their regular column. There's something that happens on that mystical level that I have grown to appreciate a great deal. It is something that I really respect and I want to encourage and just honor that, a church is a faith community. And even if a person was completely secular and had no religious beliefs, they would do better to join a church. Their life would be better. They would be, the statistics even prove that. They tend to be happier and live longer if they're involved in a church. And a secular scientist would say, well, that's regardless of what they believe, it is those community relationships that really elevate one's soul and therefore one's body. And that I feel like is the most important thing that I have to share with you. So if you want to pull your congregation together, find communal prayer and discernment activities that an entire faith community can focus on together. Now, with that, I shall conclude. And I do want to share the best practices with church stewardship. This is one of my favorite books, Charles Zach. It's a corresponding volume to his book, Why Catholics Don't Give. If you would like a year-round calendar and a long-range plan, you can go to our website, church-development.com, and download under the resources tab a sample calendar, a strategic plan, a guide to your stewardship activities. And down there is also our stewardship system book that we will give away. As a bonus, I would encourage you to start a planned giving effort in your church. This is my favorite planned giving researcher, where at St. Thomas More, after concluding a capital campaign, we began a planned giving effort that resulted in us raising estate commitments that were equal to the size of the amount we raised in the capital campaign. Now, in addition, if you have, if you're about to embark on a church capital campaign, I would happily volunteer experts that I know that could help you prepare for that capital campaign. Jennifer Gutierrez has been a visioning facilitator for decades. I would happily connect you with her. We have an architectural firm in Omaha that specializes in building churches. And we have Charity Kuhn, a church loan expert. And I am the capital campaign consultant, and each of us would volunteer to share our expertise with you at no cost. We can't spend 8 hours with you, but we can certainly meet with your committee by Zoom to share what works with other churches. And that's the meaning of our lives, is to serve the church, and we have a lot of resources and expertise that we could share with you. So thank you so much for joining me. The recording of this webinar will be available, and we will send it out to you and all those who have signed up. So with that, I will conclude. Go forth, good luck, and God bless. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.